Hello, everyone. I think that we'll start the meeting now. My name is Reem Masri and I'm a journalist. We would like today to talk with our friends on the perspectives of alternatives, whether it comes to infrastructure. Today, we have our friends, Ahmad Gharbie. I don't think if there's a lag. We also have Nadine, an activist, and works on other economics. And finally, we have Hanna, Kraytem, a technician who works on social media. Of course, we should all talk that so we will talk about the history of the internet in the Middle East and how it changed from being a decentralized service. Now, some big techs are controlling the internet. They reap the benefits and the profits of the internet without being monitored. But if you remember, Facebook was banned from the internet on the beginning of the month because of a technological problem. So can our guest explain how the internet became a centralized network? We will start with Ahmad. Ahmad, you're on a mute. Thank you, Reem. I would like to give a general overview on centralized and decentralized services. Then we will talk about everything starting from the disappearance of Facebook and its impacts. In fact, this disappearance was a result of the centralized service. Hanna will talk to us more about the aspects of centralized and decentralized services. In a brief, I considered that decentralized and centralized services are two edges of the same spectrum. So in the centralized services, the users cannot control their apps and so on unless the central provider does so. As we know, internet and the network was at the beginning decentralized. Everyone was considered as a peer. There was no rule to define the user or the provider, which is different from the telephone use. Because as you know, we need a phone to talk with other people. And this relies on some central providers. So the messages should go from a party to another. And I'm not only talking about written messages, but all sorts of data that can go through the network. The network doesn't care to understand the content and doesn't distinguish between it. This is, in fact, is a subject of a debate because some people ask about the impartiality of the network. In the past, each network worked differently. But eventually, these networks are as nodes on other bigger networks. So we have small networks that are connected to the internet, which is considered the bigger network. And the only condition is to connect to these networks and to participate. And the number of applications on the networks is not defined. No one ever thought that all those apps that we are currently using would be available. Can I interrupt you for a moment? Because I see that this is an important slide and I feel that we're only seeing one slide. So can you just go over these slides when you are talking? Because we're still on the apps slide since the beginning. No, we were seeing the application slide only. I was talking about the internet, which is a network that aims at transferring messages despite the content of those messages. That's why we have this diversity in our applications that we couldn't have imagined when we designed the network and the internet at the beginning. I was saying that the networks that create the internet in itself are some nodes and dots related to each other. As I said, no user on the internet is required to take the approval or the approval or the license from a party. Because if people had been compelled to receive those license, people wouldn't have created all those apps. You can see the type and the form of the internet. We call it the cloud because we don't know the types of the connection between it. Here we can talk about decentralized or distributed. A distributed network means that all the dots in it work in a coordinated manner. So I can be the user or the customer, and that depends on the app design and not the network. We know BitTorrent, a common and widespread app of the decentralized services. Some people tried to ban the torrent. So the app was redesigned and became a decentralized app. Although in the past it was distributed. Yet, sometimes we need the email provider or server. But this type is considered partial centralization. In addition, some factors increase the centralization. This happened with the address servers, excuse me. In the last past years, the email addresses were being centralized. When Facebook was disrupted or interrupted, we saw this happening years ago also when Google stopped working, and some people called this a crisis. This is not a centralized service because of its design, but because of some humanitarian and economic reasons. As for the data registrar, on which people rely on when it comes to phone numbers and so on. Those services became more and more centralized, especially when people started using Google server. Sometimes because of good intentions in order to increase reliability. Unfortunately, this increased centralization. So when the number of people relying on this service increases, the server will be interrupted. As we said about the name registrar, some people are trying to decentralize more. For example, the social network. As people, we connect with each other without the need of other services or so on. So, for example, if you know someone, I'll tell you, please send them this message because I can't. And what we see offline is a reflection of what we see online. So this may happen also in the cyberspace. The social network in the cyberspace is old. It didn't start with Facebook, but since the beginning of the internet, meaning that since people were able to connect with other people who have the same interests. If you know the GECOG, it was a primary method for people to make their own codes. So it's a series of numbers and letters to send them in the footer of the email. And those codes can be deciphered through some apps, and so people can know about me more. So I don't have to choose from a drop list about my gender or my age, my region, or my location, and so on. So the geek code allows me to create my codes. Those were present in the past, yet they become centralized, and the protocol was shaped in order to serve a certain website. So this increased the profits of some companies. If we want to imagine a distributed and decentralized social network, how can we do so? We can start by designing open protocols and decentralized protocols for social networks so that people can use the needed infrastructure for independent and autonomous social networks. For example, GNU Social, OStatus, and so on. All of those were protocols that can serve the social network. And I'm not talking here about social media only, but also about recreating the cloud in a distributed social manner, because the cloud now is just a small parts that aren't connected. But I imagine that the cloud is a way to distribute my data while being while being private and not being published to the world. But this really cloud will not delete my personal data if some interruption happened in the network. Hence, we need a decentralized infrastructure. Let's be real. We should know that there are some challenges, including the slow process of development. For example, we go from the bottom to the top and not otherwise. That's why the development process is slow. In addition, our needs today may not remain valid for 10 years later. So, the actors in this regard and this field should take those variables into consideration so we can reach a stable and valid solution. But big techs will not take the opinion of everyone as we were trying to do in the former idea when we pushed people to take the opinion of the public. That's why big techs gain more money. But in the public, we try to continue and preserve the consensus of the public and to preserve that they cannot all work on the same pace. So some people may not develop their applications at the same time. In addition, it's not easy to reach a wide number of people and reach consensus among them. We add to this the technical difficulties. In big techs, we have engineers that will solve all the problems, but the common people will not be able to do so easily. As for governance, it is not an easy process. Consensus and the organization of communities is not easy. We currently blame a certain monster and we say this is the problem. But if we eliminate this monster, we will find that there are other problems that we face. Unfortunately, the community guidelines aren't accepted in the society because no one asked the public about their opinions in the guidelines before putting them. In addition, we have the political impact of censorship and monitoring. If the government decided to ban a certain app that is widely used, such as Facebook, it will cause some problems. But if the government decided to censor a certain activist or a certain uh, civil society organization, the political impact will be lower, and that would be easier. This is what I wanted to say, and I tried to be brief. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to hear them. Reem, I didn't see your request. It's fine. I forgot that I forgot to say that I wanted to make this chat decentralized, and if people have questions, please drop them in the chat box. On another hand, Ahmad's presentation was very important to understand the network's development, but knowledge in this regard is important because at the beginning, the experts were the only people using the networks. Yet, when they become popular, networks were used by everyone. There's a person who asked about to which extent Ahmad's ideas are able to being implemented. How can we implement this on the local level? Hanna, can you talk to us more about how can we implement those ideas? I will talk about social media platforms, but I would like to add to what Ahmed said. He gave us a great idea about what's going on, but we should examine the current problem, which is the relocation or recentralization of the internet. We'll talk now about the internet economy. First, we have the infrastructure, then the apps on the internet, and then the accessibility and the access to the internet. Right now, several services are being centralized and are included under the umbrella of big tech. If we look to the right of the screen, we can say that we have the Alphabet company, under which fall all the companies you can say you can see, such as Google Maps, Android, Google Apps, Google Store. And on the other hand, we can see Alibaba expansion.
So here we are seeing that there's an expansion that companies are doing, that internet companies are doing in order to cover a big number of services. However, this issue was not only based on services, it also encompasses infrastructure. So the information that we currently have is from the year 2017, and unfortunately, the situation today is worse. So we're looking here at the number of cables that run in the sea that constitute the majority of internet cables. So the cables run from one location to another when we move from one country to another, mostly in the sea. So we notice that Amazon has a very big number or a very big control on sea cables. And it is the main client for these cables. Facebook, same case for Facebook. And however, with regards to Google, it has its own cables that run along the sea, and it also controls cables that run along the sea. And we also see that Microsoft has the same case. So these companies have a certain control over cables that run along the sea. So we see that there's a control or a centralization in this case. So this happens on different domains, on different levels, especially with regards to apps. And here we're looking at the share of the major companies in global internet traffic. At the beginning of the current decade or the current century, we saw that the content providers were the minority with regards to the use of the internet traffic or the control over internet traffic. And we saw that this traffic was increasing gradually to the point that today half of the internet traffic comes from a small minority of content providers. So if we look at websites and how they are expanded and how these websites reach us after we try to open these websites, we see that there is a very rapid increase in the adoption of CPNs or content delivery networks. And these networks work as service providers for people who have websites, and they give them the service that allows them to provide content for people all around the world. And this is done through the diverse points for these networks. So these networks upload a copy of the website on its own domain so that a person in Jordan, for example, can access that website quickly without having to access a server in Morocco, for example, if he's not found in the area where this website is hosted in the first place. So this has a lot of benefits, including making accessibility more rapid. And there are certain protocols that are specific for content distribution networks. And in addition to that, this could cause certain failures. We saw a month ago that there were a lot of websites that disappeared off of the internet, and this is something that happened with Facebook, for example, as well as British government websites. And then we also have content distribution networks that take care of that, and these issues were solved quickly, but they had a huge impact. We see that there is a great increase in the dependency on content distribution networks. So here we are facing more than one problem. So there's the issue that Ahmad talked about at first, and it is agreeing on certain protocols or unified protocols. So if on open protocols, so open IPs, then we can link the networks together. So I can link my network to Ahmad's network and so on. And this is how we establish what we call internet. So when we have a group of companies that control the distribution of content and also control the linking of networks, these companies this is what they are currently doing. They are providing a group of APIs or programs that can be reused, and they are linked only to their networks. So if we look at content distribution networks for Amazon, we would be talking about applications and protocols specific to Amazon services. So this would link me as a user with Amazon as a company, and this guarantees the centrality or the centralization of services through Amazon. So let's talk quickly here about the things that we can do. So the things that we can do here is that we can look again at the issues that are happening. So last year we had a session that discussed these issues, but we still need to talk about these issues. So one of the ideas that can be implemented in order to decentralize the infrastructure are various programs that can be implemented through a group of people or communities in a certain geographical location, so they can build their own network. And this network should be in compliance with the open internet protocols, or specifically internet protocols. And then these networks can be a part of the internet, and they would need to be linked to the internet. So this is now a network in itself, and it is now a part of the overall internet component. So here we have expanded the internet through these individual networks. And we have a lot of successful examples about this all around the world, such as in Spain, for example. We have the New York Mesh Network, and in Morocco, we have an internet distribution and network for remote areas. And there are also other examples in many places. So now we are working on a network in Yemen, and now we have applications, but we still have to work on the legal framework for that. So this is the main issue right now. Unfortunately, as well, there are a lot of risks that we are seeing in this regard. So we saw that there are new internet protocols that are being studied, and they impact directly the neutrality of the network and its unbiasedness, such as the new IP protocols that were presented by the Chinese government through Huawei and other companies. And we saw that there was a combination of various protocols, just like Ahmad said during his intervention. So now we are facing the risk of related to the issue of IPs in themselves. So the new system gives more capacities to the governments, or specifically network providers, with regards to linking the networks and then rerouting as well. And this impacts greatly the other aspects. So I believe that we should defend an open internet through open protocols that are built primarily on decentralization. So how can we reflect these ideas on the issue of social networks? Very quickly, I'm going to talk about this in a couple of minutes. So just like Ahmad said, we have a big number of protocols that are similar to the protocols on which the internet is built via their decentrality or decentralization. So I believe that this should be made as the mainstream in the use of the internet. Thank you so much, Hanna, for the very important points that you just discussed and that you clarified. And you gave us a great visual idea about the decentralization uh, of the internet and submarine cables. And if we have some time left at the end, I would like to go back to the realistic implementation based on your work on establishing decentralized networks or community networks at the level of the infrastructure. So if we are able to go back to this point and talk about the components that this network needs and the challenges that these networks are facing, especially in Arab countries. that would be great. But now we are going to talk about how we are able to reflect the decentralization of the infrastructure that we want to happen, especially with regards to the web. Nadine, I know that you have been conducting research for a while about the alternative economic models in order to establish a more just internet and distribute creative content. So if you can talk to us briefly about the research that you are conducting, and I know that sometimes we ask more questions than we are able to receive answers, but these questions are very important. Thank you so much, Reem. Of course, during this time, there are a lot of questions that are being asked. Are you able to see my screen? So if someone can unmute his microphone and tell me whether they can see the screen or not. Nadine, yes, that's great. We can see it. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Reem, Ahmad, and Hanna for your interventions. I'm going to try to talk during the next 8 minutes about the work that I am doing and which builds on the ideas that were presented by Ahmad and Hanna. So I am currently working with a team from Mouawad, and we can say that these people are a bit unconventional in the world of technology, and we are trying through our work to implement technical policies and get new people into this domain. So a good similarity here in that case would be that if we think about urban planning, it is never said that to urban planners that they are not architects or engineers, so they cannot contribute to the policy building with regards to uh, building bridges, for example. So the same thing applies in the technical field. So sometimes we tend to think that this is a domain that is specific to certain specialized people. However, it's important to note that there are a lot of people who can talk about this issue. So we try to include more people in the creative world, in music and art. And we try to talk about how the internet is built, what are the solutions for the problems that we are facing and that you just talked about. And it is very important to note that sometimes people forget that technology is the result of imagination, even before it is the result of programming or electronic building. So I should start, or we should start to imagine what I can do or what I can develop in order to make the lives of the people around me better. So, technology was inspired by science fiction and the people who imagined societies almost 100 or 200 years ago. So, it's very important for us to think about the world of creativity and culture and innovation in order to imagine these networks. So, just to add a couple of points to what Hannah said about cables. So, in our historical context, there were a lot of complexities or difficulties. So, when we established the networks, almost a century and a half ago, these networks were funded by the state for almost 100 years. There was an idea that the government owns communication companies or communication networks because the communication of people together is considered as one of the primary needs of people. So here we can understand that we got to a point where communication with each other is controlled by private companies. And here, capitalism is causing these companies to merge with one another. So now we have less and less companies. So here, when we talk about the government or the state, we're not talking about an oppressive state. Here we are talking about a common fund for millions of people who live in one geographic location. So we pay taxes to this fund so that it can provide to us infrastructure and services so that we can communicate together. And then this income coming from the taxes has disappeared. So here we understand why there's a panic with regards to taxes on WhatsApp and megabytes. And you know that the tax on WhatsApp caused a huge scandal in Lebanon, and it was a reason for the rage and the 17th of October revolution that happened in Lebanon. But here, the state is trying to understand how it is able to get income from these companies, or to offset the companies that have taken all that income from it. So here, when we talk about the World Wide Web, there was a certain worry with regards to what are the things that have value, or how can we may monetize this network. So the agreement at first was for us to profit from the eyeballs that are found on this network. So this is how spam started, email started, and then web banners. So we used to sell advertisements on these web banners to have people advertise on our websites, and then there were donations as well. And now newspapers should all have a paywall. So here you would have to pay, for example, before you are able to read an article, or you'd have to subscribe for a monthly subscription. And then there was also the selling of data by these companies so that they can predict what are our likes and dislikes, and predict for years to come ideas that would help them in advertisement. So there's also the idea that of protocols that the other speakers talked about. So I'm going to try to cut it short here, and to talk here about, in the system, who has the power and the control over this infrastructure that keeps the economic wheel going. So in the framework of our study that is being conducted about the relationship of artists with the gig economy, and this is a kind of economy in which we currently live. So for example, your work is being, or part of your income from the work that you are doing is being extracted bit by bit by a huge global company. So the most suitable story about how the domain of artists and art changed, if we look at the Kodak company in the year 1988, it had around 150,000 workers who were working in the field of photography, and it was worth $31 billion in the 90s. And then we move on to Instagram. It took over the world of photography, so now we barely hear of Kodak. So now its value is even greater than that of Kodak, but you can see the number of people or photographers who are employed by this company. So now we ask ourselves, where are the jobs going and where are the employees going? We can clearly see that there is a promise through these platforms that are used by artists that they do not need anyone to help them. They do not need a manager or a team, so they can do everything from the comfort of their own home. And then the platform promises them that it will organize their payments, so they will be paid from the comfort of their own home, and this platform will help them advertise on social media. So a lot of creative content creators say that they face a lot of pressure because they have to take up responsibilities for which they are not trained, and which takes over their creativity. So here we can ask ourselves, what are the aspects that we are automating, and what are the aspects on which technology is taking over? So just like with social media, in the digital streaming platform world, so these are the platforms that we use in order to stream videos or other types of content. There are, of course, a lot of problems. And the main problem is that these are all profit companies, and companies that have valuations of millions and billions of dollars. And then eventually income is going to people who are placing the main value in these companies as a cent on the dollar. So if I subscribe to a certain service. I am now a hostage of this service, so I don't have the option to change from one platform to another because I am now tied to this platform because this is where I built my base of followers. So now it is very difficult for people to imagine, or I don't even know if it's actually difficult, but at least for the new generation of artists, they believe that it is impossible for them to enter a certain domain of art without having a lot of followers, for example. So this causes pressure on the producer or the artist because they would need to have a lot of files and follow trends. And then if they skip on that for a couple of months, then they believe that their popularity is going to decrease. And then add to it that there is the personal taste of listeners and readers. So now our taste is being controlled by these algorithms. So where there is a focus on popularity, there is greater focus on popularity than taste. So if we have a venue, for example, that controls music, so a certain artist might not be able to reach popularity if he does not play in this venue, and then this venue is going to take a huge portion of his income or his profits. So if one of us likes this kind of music or this kind of art, then we're going to feel that we have to go into that venue because all of the audience is there. So same thing, if we have a printing or publishing company that controls all the publications in the world, then it has the option to over-publish books or to stop publishing books or just cancel out all the books. So would we choose to buy from this publishing company or this printing company, or would we resort to finding independent publishing or printing companies, even if this includes a lot of effort and a lot of struggle? But we should do that for our taste and for the sake of art and theater and visual art. So it's not only important to talk about its importance with regards to society, it's also important for imagination and social values. So is it possible for us to leave all of the poets and the artists as hostages to these companies? Or should we start thinking about new and serious alternatives that start with the listeners or even us as audience? So this is not just a problem for the artists themselves. So here we think of examples. So here we have one of the examples of global networks that try to build fair platforms for creativity and art and music. So I believe that we cannot insist enough on the need to free the imagination of the generation of this millennium. So even if I was born during a time where there was pictures of me on Facebook when I was only 2 years old, this does not mean that the internet was designed in this way, and we need these companies so that we can communicate with one another and build networks and release creative art. So just like you said, Reem, there are more questions than there are answers, but there's also great worry with regards to the cultural future that is being controlled by these companies. So I'm going to stop here. I was not able to reach 8 minutes, but we only have 5 minutes left of this session. Thank you so much, Nadine. And of course, as you said, these are very important questions. And I don't know, I follow a person that's called Ethan Zuckerman. He's an academic and he talks a lot about the decentralization of internet. And one of the things that really stuck in my mind after I followed him, he talked about the decentralization of the internet, especially with regards to the web. And he said, should the entire world be one community on one platform? Or we really, as communities or as communal groups, should we all be found on one single platform, or can we create different instances of social media platforms or platforms on which we can publish and share creative content. So should there be laws or regulations that regulate the sharing of this kind of content? And another kind of question, and I'm looking at the questions that were included in the chat box. So one of the question was related to the ownership of submarine cables, and this question was directed at Hanna. So since the ownership of submarine cables is becoming more and more centralized, then how can we own tools and the infrastructure? Because if the person that is providing us with a global internet is very centralized, so these are specific companies that we are talking about. So at the level of communities or neighborhoods and cities, how can we regain ownership of these tools or these infrastructure? Thank you. So with regards to what you just said, should be a part of one community or one virtual community, I say that it is better to have a number of platforms or communities. So we should not all be part of one virtual environment. However, it is very important and necessary to have the freedom of choice over which community we would like to join. So here, the issue that is related to the impact of the network is very important. So Ahmad talked about this, and it was a very important topic. So this is one of the impacts that specify what community we're going to be part of. So if I have the freedom of choice and I am capable to choose which network I want to be affiliated to or which network I want to join, then this is going to help me a lot. So here we talk about an open source internet that is linked and it is able to reach, or people all around the world are able to reach it through a network that is able to be publicly used. So this is not a network that is only used to transmit certain kind of content. So this is a network that we can use to upload all kinds of applications. So with the question related to the ownership of submarine cables, here we are facing a dilemma. So we have the issue related to regaining ownership of all the networks that are found around us. So within my neighborhood or within my region, I am able to establish a network or a mesh network that is distributed at the level of the infrastructure. But here there's a problem with regards to if we have a certain party that controls these networks and they are not found anymore. So this is going to impact the network. So this network is always going to be a link to the internet network. So this is how I talked about submarine cables and how they are the backbone of this network. So here, what would help us is the idea of open internet protocols and the existence of an open network that can be used publicly. So if we have a network that is supported or that supports open source protocols, such as internet protocols, for example, then I can transmit coded messages via VPNs, and I'm able to surpass this control. But however, we still have the issue of economic control. So in order to face this issue, we are facing the issue of an economic war in this case. So for us to all stop using Microsoft or emails, for example, that would be a solution, but there wouldn't be any more ownership of these companies over these submarine cables.
Moreover, to get wide space to get the data. This is briefly what I wanted to share with you. Session, and we hope that we answered all the questions. I think that all the questions are valid, that despite that